Hello, this talk is called Machine Learning for Autonomous Surveying. The authors are myself, David Noever, Matt Ciolino, Dom Hambrick, and Wes Region, and we're from People Tech in Huntsville, Alabama. The picture you show off to the right is a tree counting, and you see the bounding boxes, and each one is identified with both the object and the class, and we're going to show some reasons why that is of interest for autonomous surveying within the Corps of Engineers. So the outline of the paper is or the presentation is our problem statement is, can we use satellite and drone imagery to automate the required land use surveys for Army Corps of Engineers uses? So I'm going to introduce this by saying what is autonomous surveying and why might it be efficient to automate that. Then we're going to show you some methods we use to assess its viability. Finally, we'll summarize the results and conclusions. Here's an example on the right of a denser suburban area, and you see a density of trees here intermixed with a lot of different objects, and we're clearly able to pick out from this drone imagery all the tree caps. So why computer vision for this problem? Actually, since about 2012, deep learning algorithms, which I'll explain pictorially in the next slide, now can routinely outperform human experts to greater than 90% accuracy and at greater persistent speeds for complex vision tasks. And I want to emphasize it both in terms of accuracy and speed. A third characteristic here is the absolute volume. So particularly on the drone side, it's very easy to collect terabytes, hundreds of terabytes of video imagery. And the question is, what to do with that and where to store it and how to extract all the information and metadata from it. On the right, I show some example applications of what you would do in a traditional tree survey or other Corps of Engineers task on federal land. For example, you might want to do overhead counting of trees. An important thing in the wetlands is soil erosion control, ground maintenance, land use maintenance. You want to, forest management for fires, wildlife conservation, so counting objects from a drone, and finally pest control, particularly for damaged trees. And I'll show you some examples of how that might look. So what is deep learning? If you look on the left, you see two classes. Say these are cats and dogs. The red is cats and the blue is dogs, and we want to figure out the separating line. And if that's done in pixels, the interesting thing is to the right is you can build a traditional neural network. If you're not familiar with this, it traditionally has an input layer, a series of intermediate layers, and an output layer. So you might put pixel 1 here and pixel 1024 here, and then you weight the importance of that pixel to figuring out a class on the other side. The interesting part of that process is the classes typically you collect training data and isolate it. What we're going to use is something called a mask R in CNN. And all you really need to know about that is it will develop anchor boxes. So for example, when you saw in that earlier picture, the trees get little colored boxes around it. That's kind of the output. It can also produce classes. So is it a tree or not a tree? And it can even go down to the pixel level. The sort of breakthrough that came about with this proposal is it used a partially pre-trained network. So you can think of this as isolating features of a tree seen from above, green, color, the shape, etc. And then it proposes various priorities that lay in a sort of pyramid of classifier. So you extract all the features, just like any other computer vision problem, you find perhaps edges or shapes, you rotationally align it, and finally you have a different size anchor boxes, which you're going to put on objects and then pick the best one. So clearly, the deep learning part, which was in addition to the traditional, is from a pixel. So I'm here, we'll spread it out, solve for the weights, and then lengthen it like an accordion until we get, in many cases, what's a fully connected network. So let's show some examples of what the survey challenge is for the Corps of Engineers. On Army installations, the Corps of Engineers manages about 54,000 acres of forest land. The thing we were interested in is we're looking at that 314-mile stretch from the Mississippi River, from Iowa to the Louisiana Delta. So there's a variety of biomes there, but here is a picture of Lock 2 in the geolat long. And basically, we go down here and we miss a few trees, but basically, this neural network, which I'll show you how we trained it on multiple trees, a human labeler has done the original, and then this is able to reproduce the tree recognition. So in a single picture, that's the survey, and that's the challenge is let's do tree detection from above. Here's a second version of that in a slightly different kind of density. So here is our starting image that comes into our processor, and here's our final image where we've counted the majority of these trees. And interestingly, you can assign a probability that that's a tree. So some of these might look like bushes, some of them might look like grass, different colored grass sections. And so ultimately you can tune this with different probabilities or confidences. So why would you want to do this from an aerial viewpoint? You know, typically the task we outlined or included in this study were counting and cataloging by type and tree age. So for example, you want to understand, is this forest potentially ready for logging on federal land? What's the maturity? What's the canopy density? And also, you know, the broader stretch of forestry harvesting or wetland assessment. So again, you see some denser urban, and we'll show examples of the different biomes and the challenges, but it does a pretty good job in these suburban areas. Again, this is the original image, and this is the marked up image, and you can count them and know their location. So these region-based tree detectors that I showed in the picture, the way we train them is our team labeled 2,700 trees. We had 34 satellite images covering about 10 square miles. There are many types of backgrounds from military bases and airports to deserts. We train about 200 epochs, if you want to think of that as number of times you pass the image through the network, and slowly it begins to evolve a solution. And then we can generalize those results to outside of our training data, including some drone footage. So we took satellite imagery, trained how to recognize a tree, and then you can put it on a drone. So it's kind of the results or evaluation stages you typically go through this is you split a number of images from test images and train images. So typically 70% of the data you'll train on and 30% you'll test on. And then you find the mean average precision. So this is, since we're just looking at trees here, that's just the precision. So how many, what's the ratio of false negatives to the total or false positives to the total. And so that's basically the scalpel that goes in and says everything I marked up as a tree, and I didn't mark up any other parts of the image. And so we report both a number of training results. Basically, for training and validation, we show that our loss function is 0.298, which is pretty good. We have the probability of a class, meaning I see a tree, the probability of a bounding box, meaning I've located that tree, and then various other sort of accuracy metrics. The other part is you can refine that by you looking at the validation set. So this is something that the network has not seen. And we typically see a higher or lower accuracy in this, which means to some extent 2,700 images could be more for marked up trees if you wanted to increase the accuracy of this model. So I mentioned earlier that this could be quite useful for tree damage assessments. So here's an example. It's a drone footage where all these gray areas are disease affected, and we're just going to look for the green ones. And so we've marked up just this section of this dense forest, and we could identify this broader macro region as consisting of damaged trees. So we basically built an aerial catalog autonomously, and typically this is done by the Corps of Engineers with manually with ground vehicles, and you do sort of ecological studies where you look for sample locations and then generalize to the broader forest. And so But there is a ton of drone footage associated with surveying federal lands, and we think this is a useful application of both um, the drone technology, the breakthroughs in drone technology, and also the breakthroughs in computer vision. So, where can you do this? How heavy is it for computationally? And so we benchmark this basically on a commodity laptop, and you can mark up one of these about 1 frame a second, depending on the image size. But clearly, it's a candidate for cloud-based services, both because that's where the data is being stored, and that's also where these you can spin up as much computational power. If it's a low priority task, for example, just maintaining change detection over months, then you may not be that urgent in terms of adding more computational power, but it helps to be close to the data. Particularly, there are predictive models out there for 80 years of growth monitoring. So that's something where you would run it perhaps twice a month to see when the forest is ready to be harvested. So there also are some opportunities in addition to drone to take advantage of the real explosion of low Earth orbit satellites. So you can actually commercially buy that, and the price is getting pretty low. So, for example, you can buy a picture over Louisiana for about $20, and it will cover anywhere from 1 to 2 square kilometers. So it can get expensive if you're talking about surveying an entire Mississippi Delta, but if you're looking at selectively avoiding having to send someone to the field repeatedly, that 1999 investment could be pretty good. So now I just want to flip through a couple quick examples of how tree detection works in diverse backgrounds. So you can imagine a tree could look different in a dense forest versus a desert, and we want to pick them off as they go. So here's a land use example where we're doing a commercial survey or residential survey. So this is, say, a big box store, and it's surrounded by parking lot, which is very evenly spaced, but we do have a lot of sort of background clutter in terms of cars. Here's a more commercial space as well. There's a military base where you see they've, unlike the random order that you might see in a natural forest, everything is along the street line, and that also is an interesting use case. In a military or recreational sense, here's a base. I think this is in Louisiana. And again, you got a lot of different background colors here, and you're able to pick off this dense area of trees. And sort of more of the same, this is sort of a closer view, but you see different patterns of foliage growth, whether it's dense or sparse. And finally, you get to a sort of airstrip scenario where, you've got some paths here, but you've mostly got open areas, and here you've got a grassy biome. And we show you can get both of those with pretty decent counts. And obviously, sending someone out to a dense forest is a different task than sending someone out to an airport. We also were interested in seasonal changes without foliage. So you look at winter or summer growth over time, and also against different kinds of backgrounds in different parts of the country. That's an interesting case to consider. And finally, very low density sparse trees. So this is almost similar to what we were talking about with the parking lot or airport scenario, but this could be an interesting maintenance task. And here's kind of a medium density case. And again, all I'm doing is want to show you that this is pretty robust, and we can count these trees in bounding boxes and geolocate them. And this is probably the highest density we did, which is a suburban location in a military base of residential areas. And you see, there are some cases that we're missing, but the majority of them, we get a pretty good density count. And if you're doing change detection, you can imagine I'm not as interested as the absolute count as the percent change running it multiple times. And here's the example I promised with the seasonal. So you can look at a green background. Here's an airport area or a parking area, I guess. And here's a light area, and you can still pick off. So that's a little bit different than just scanning the world, for example, for green patches. And here's some more examples. So in conclusion, we think land use and survey automation is a promising Corps of Engineers capability. It offers considerable efficiencies. There are large aerial archives that can be used for change detection over time, but also forensically. So it would be interesting to go back, for example, 10 years ago and count and then bring up to date those surveys. It is there is as I sort of want to emphasize, we're kind of highlighting the tree counting scenario, but there's also damage assessments, growth stages, and of course, the opportunity to do this in the cloud is a promising one. So with that, I'll pause and thank you for your attention.